Tanzania has slapped Acacia Mining with a tax bill of $190 billion. That's equivalent to almost 2 centuries worth of oil producers' revenue.
Tanzania. The Tanzanian president has lashed out at several Western nations, particularly the US, for interfering in the country's internal affairs. Speaking at the 60th anniversary celebration of the Tanzanian police force, the president, Samia Suluhu Hassan, had explicitly said that her government should not be told how to run the country.
Energy markets are heating up, and Africa just lit the fuse. In a stunning move shaking boardrooms from Washington to Beijing, Tanzania has slammed the door on a major US oil giant, sending a clear message that a new era of African control has begun. As the world scrambles for the last great energy frontiers, Tanzania isn't bowing to pressure. It's drawing the line. What triggered this seismic decision? Why is the global energy race suddenly tilting toward East Africa? And how is Tanzania turning one bold refusal into a powerful statement of independence? This is the moment the world realized Africa is no longer just a player, it's becoming the arena.
The world did not see it coming. One moment, Tanzania was quietly expanding its energy capabilities, surveying new offshore basins, and strengthening its inland production fields. The next moment, it stood boldly on the global stage, blocking one of the largest oil companies in the United States from entering its sector. It was a move so sudden, so decisive, and so unapologetic that it immediately sent ripples across international energy markets. It wasn't simply a contract rejection. It was a declaration, a message that Africa was no longer playing by old rules where powerful nations dictated the terms. Tanzania had crossed a threshold, stepping fully into a new era of sovereignty, strategy, and control. The decision ignited urgent discussions in global boardrooms. Energy analysts scrambled for explanations. News channels replayed the moment with growing intensity. This wasn't just Tanzania taking a stance. This was an African nation standing firm against one of the most influential corporate forces on the planet. And for many, it symbolized a broader shift, the rise of Africa as an independent energy powerhouse. Tanzania's energy boom had been building for years. Quiet at first, understated, almost unnoticed by the world. But beneath the surface, something massive was forming. Offshore mapping revealed reservoirs with enormous potential. Inland fields were yielding promising results. Regional demand was increasing rapidly, and Tanzania suddenly found itself positioned as one of the most crucial energy players in East Africa. By the time global corporations realized what was happening, Tanzania's ambitions were already rooted deep in national strategy. The country wanted more than extraction. It wanted transformation, pipelines, refineries, storage facilities, and long-term energy security. It wanted to control production from the first drill to the final shipment. And it wanted partnerships built on fairness, not dominance. So when the U.S. oil giant approached with its familiar blueprint, immense scale, advanced technology, global reach, and financial muscle, the world assumed Tanzania would accept without hesitation. This was, after all, a corporation with operations spread across continents, a company accustomed to shaping the landscape of the global oil industry. But Tanzania had its own blueprint now. Negotiations began quietly, away from cameras and headlines. Proposals were studied. Teams analyzed long-term implications. And gradually, it became clear that the offer on the table did not align with Tanzania's new vision. The proposed terms reflected an old-era model where foreign corporations controlled too much and local industries gained too little. Tanzania refused to step backward. In a statement that immediately triggered global attention, Tanzania stood firm and shut the door. The U.S. oil giant was not getting access, not under those terms, not in this era, not in this new Africa. The reaction was immediate. Energy markets flickered with uncertainty. Analysts across Europe, Asia, and North America speculated about the impact. Investors questioned how such a decision could reshape the geopolitical landscape of East Africa. Tanzania, a nation many had underestimated, had suddenly become a focal point in international energy debates. The United States, surprised by the rejection, began assessing the broader implications. If Tanzania could push back against one of the world's largest corporations, what did that mean for future negotiations with African nations? What did it mean for global energy security? What did it mean for competition with rising powers such as China, India, and regional African companies that had been aggressively expanding their investments in the continent. Africa was no longer just the frontier of extraction. It was becoming a strategic battlefield for influence, partnerships, and control. Inside Africa, the response was electric. East African nations watched Tanzania with admiration and curiosity. Could this spark a chain reaction of countries asserting stronger control over their natural resources? Could it redefine how African nations negotiate with major global corporations? Could it break decades-old patterns of dependency? Tanzania didn't hesitate to reinforce its position. Almost immediately after the rejection, it announced new policies prioritizing local content, domestic ownership, and long-term national benefit. Energy companies from Asia and the Middle East, already seeking a foothold in East Africa, reacted quickly. Several signaled interest in revisiting terms with Tanzania, and some proposed partnerships that emphasized equality and development. The geopolitical chessboard was shifting. In Dar es Salaam, officials analyzed new opportunities that emerged from their bold decision. Tanzania's energy boom was no longer simply a resource discovery. It had become a strategic tool, a chance to reshape the nation's economy, strengthen regional influence, and build a future where Tanzania was not just another energy producer, but a continental leader. Infrastructure plans expanded. New pipelines were evaluated. Port upgrades on the Indian Ocean coastline were accelerated. Tanzania was preparing not for dependence, but for dominance. And the rejection of the U.S. company had done something unexpected. It had unified the national narrative. Citizens saw the decision as a symbol of pride. Africa had often been portrayed as a follower in the global energy race, a continent reacting to decisions made elsewhere. But Tanzania had flipped the script. It was now directing its own energy destiny. Global think tanks began publishing urgent reports, assessing what Tanzania's move meant for future energy competition. Some argued that it strengthened Africa's bargaining power. Others warned that it could escalate geopolitical tension in a region already attracting interest from global powers. Some celebrated it as a sign of Africa's growing economic maturity. But almost all agreed on one thing. Tanzania had changed the way African nations negotiate. Meanwhile, regional rivals watched with mixed reactions. Some countries saw opportunity, a chance to align with Tanzania and build a stronger East African energy corridor. Others saw a challenge, fearing they might lose influence if Tanzania became the dominant energy hub in the region. The competition intensified, but Tanzania didn't flinch. With new partnerships emerging and expanding global interest, the country had newfound leverage. It knew the world needed energy, and Tanzania had it. It knew global corporations needed new territories, and Tanzania could choose who entered and who stayed out. The U.S. oil giant, once confident, now found itself outside the gates of one of the most promising energy sectors in the region. And because Tanzania's stance was firm and public, reversing it would be almost impossible without losing the credibility that had captured the world's attention. Behind the scenes, diplomats and economic advisors from multiple countries began exploring their own strategies. Tanzania's new direction would affect trade lanes, fuel supply chains, regional infrastructure, and even political alliances. Tanzania was not just rejecting a company, it was reshaping the strategic map of East Africa. This was more than a national decision. It was a signal to the world. Africa was no longer content with being an extraction zone. Africa was becoming a global competitor, and Tanzania had just stepped forward to lead the charge. And the world was only beginning to understand the scale of what had just happened. As global conversations intensified, something profound began unfolding across African markets, a wave of renewed confidence. Tanzania's refusal was not only a national decision, it was a continental spark. Countries across East, West, and Southern Africa began revisiting their contracts, reassessing their long-term interests, and reconsidering the terms imposed by foreign corporations that had operated with near-total freedom for decades. Tanzania hadn't just stood firm for itself. It had unknowingly fueled a regional awakening. East Africa, long seen as a rising corridor for energy and trade, now had a new center of gravity. Tanzania's growing network of energy fields and offshore reserves attracted companies from regions eager to form long-term alliances. Firms from the Gulf, Europe and Asia positioned themselves as strategic partners willing to operate under Tanzania's new rules. Rules emphasizing local participation, transparent benefits, and future-oriented investment. Tanzania welcomed interest but moved cautiously, aware that the world was watching. Every move it made now carried geopolitical weight. The rejection of the U.S. oil giant had elevated the country into a new category. No longer a small player negotiating from the margins, but a major contender controlling access to a valuable and strategic energy landscape. Energy specialists across Africa began pointing to Tanzania as proof that the continent's resources could be leveraged with far more power than previously imagined. Countries rich in gas, oil, minerals, and rare earth materials took note. Tanzania had shown that saying no to global pressure was possible, and that doing so could unlock a future defined not by dependency, but by opportunity. At the same time, global powers reassessed their positioning. The United States, accustomed to strong alliances and deep corporate influence across regions, now confronted the reality that access to Africa's strategic resources could no longer be guaranteed by default. Diplomats quietly began discussing new strategies, new approaches, and new terms that could meet the expectations of countries determined to control their own destinies. China, already deeply invested in African infrastructure, saw Tanzania's stance as a sign that the continent's negotiating power was growing. Companies from China began signaling readiness to collaborate on downstream operations, refinery construction, and high-tech energy processing. India, seeking to expand its global reach, intensified its interest in regional partnerships. Middle Eastern oil and gas firms, recognizing the rising demand for natural gas across Africa, also recalibrated their offers. Tanzania suddenly found itself in an enviable position, courted by multiple global players, holding leverage it had never possessed before. And the timing couldn't have been more critical. Tanzania's domestic energy boom was accelerating. Explorations revealed deeper reserves. Production output grew. New pipeline plans gained regional traction. Local industries expanded with confidence, supported by national policies prioritizing homegrown development. For the first time, Tanzania envisioned itself not only as an energy supplier, but as an energy architect, shaping the region's development, influencing Africa's future, and participating in global markets as an equal rather than a subordinate. The country's ports along the Indian Ocean began drawing attention as emerging logistical gateways. Proposed export routes promised to transform regional trade flows. Discussions surrounding refinery upgrades and LNG terminals intensified. The air in Tanzania buzzed with possibility, not the distant dream of potential, but the tangible momentum of a nation rising fast. Yet the pressure was real. Standing firm against a major U.S. company came with risks. Global corporations rarely backed down quietly. Some analysts warned of subtle economic pushback. Others feared that Tanzania's decision could trigger political tension, especially as global powers compete fiercely for access to energy. But Tanzania showed no signs of backing away. Its confidence stemmed from more than pride. It came from strategy, calculation, and a deep understanding of the shifting global landscape. The world was transitioning toward new energy sources, new alliances, and new patterns of geopolitical influence. Tanzania understood that the energy race of the 21st century would not be dominated solely by the old powers. The country saw itself as part of a rising generation of nations positioned to play a larger role, not as resource suppliers, but as economic forces capable of shaping rules, directing negotiations, and defining long-term strategies. And so, while tensions simmered in diplomatic circles, Tanzania expanded its regional influence with precision. Neighboring countries began exploring cross-border pipeline agreements. Talks surfaced about shared energy infrastructure, enhanced security cooperation, and regional refining networks. Tanzania envisioned an East African energy corridor, a system that would support industrialization, boost employment, and strengthen its role as a continental anchor. But the U.S. oil giant's exclusion remained the centerpiece of global debate. Energy market analysts dissected every detail. Financial commentators questioned how U.S. corporations would adjust their strategies in Africa. Some predicted deeper competition between global powers. Others argued that Tanzania's move represented a new geopolitical equilibrium, where African nations held more authority in deciding who could access their resources. Tanzania, meanwhile, navigated the storm with calculated precision. It reinforced regulatory frameworks to